Here we are at one of the maybe most talked about, most dreaded transits in astrology, and that is Mercury Retrograde. This one is happening in Scorpio, so it's happening between November 25th and December 15th, 2024 in sidereal Scorpio, and I'm here to tell you all about it, tell you why I think maybe you shouldn't be afraid, how to best work with the energy so that you have nothing to worry about. But this is one of those things, I love talking about Mercury retrograde because it's one of those things that even people who are paying almost no attention to astrology, or people that kind of poo-poo on astrology, they like to poke fun at people who are interested in astrology. Believe me, I'm a professional astrologer and I'm surrounded by them. Even those kind of people notice the effects of Mercury retrograde. Or if you ever see, sometimes on social media, people will be like, what is going on right now? Which is why I'm having such a hard time. And it's often related to Mercury retrograde. So I'm going to tell you all about this one, Mercury retrogrades in general, what to expect for this one, how to best work with the energy. I really don't think it's something that you need to, we want to be aware of it. It tends to be one of the more noticeable things, but in what my mom always calls the 10-year test, Mercury retrograde's probably not really affecting that much the 10-year trajectory of your life. In 10 years, you're not going to probably look back on a Mercury retrograde and be like, wow, that really changed my life course. So we talk about some other things here on this podcast, the YOGISCOPES podcast, that like just recently I've been talking a lot about the movements of Saturn and Rahu and Ketu, which are responsible for eclipses. Those are more like I talked about last week, like the rip current in our lives, the undertow, right? Mercury retrograde, really impactful on the surface, not so impactful to your overall trajectory. But let's talk about it. So first, I'd like to extend you a warm welcome to the YOGISCOPES podcast. I'm your host, Rose Holbrook. I am a Vedic sidereal astrologer. So when I say this Mercury retrograde is happening in Scorpio, that is entirely within the sidereal sign of Scorpio. So if you're out there in the internet land, on social media, whatever, some folks, probably a lot of folks, especially if you live in a Western country like, the United States, Canada, Australia, England, the UK, whatever, if you live in one of those places, it's likely that people are saying it's happening somewhere else, maybe in Scorpio and Libra or something. I don't know. But the sidereal zodiac is the more astronomically precise placements of the planets. And that's what the Vedic system uses. So I use Vedic astrology, which uses the sidereal zodiac, because I'm a yoga therapist, which means on every episode of the YOGISCOPES podcast, I'm telling you ways to therapeutically apply the wisdom of yoga to what is going on, what is being brought up astrologically. And this episode is no different, so stick around to the end for yoga practices and journal prompts to best work with the energy. So let's dive in with all the juicy details of Mercury retrograde. So usually how we understand anything happening astrologically is we look at the planet that's involved, or planets, in this case Mercury. We look at what the planet represents, where its archetypes come from. We look at the sign, because so every Mercury retrograde is going to bring up similar things, but the vibe will slightly change based on the sign or signs where it's happening. And then to take it a layer deeper, we can also look at the Nakshatras, the lunar mansions, which is a concept that, to my knowledge, is exclusive to Vedic astrology. I don't know if there's an analogous Western astrology concept. Sometimes I try to make those analogies because I get a lot of folks coming to me with some confusion because they're like, I read this on social media. And it's like, a lot of people, if they're in the Western astrology paradigm, they're probably not distinguishing. They're probably just saying this is astrology. And that's coming up a lot right now around this Pluto thing. Pluto moving to Aquarius under the tropical zodiac. I get extra tangent-y around Mercury retrograde. I'm usually pretty tangent-y, but this is a side effect of Mercury retrograde, I think, for me. I have Mercury retrograde in my birth chart, so it's fun. Let's explore why. So we look at the archetypes of all of these things factoring into play, and we'll dive into each piece individually in this episode, and then we will recap with overall energies of the time, as well as yoga practices and journal prompts. First, just a couple housekeeping announcements. We usually do a meditation challenge for Mercury retrograde, and this time I'm bringing it back in a very low key. A lot of times I will kind of promote it for a couple weeks in advance and maybe have some really big prizes. Earlier this year, I gave away a spot in my trauma-informed Vedic astrologer certification program. I'm not doing that this time. I could probably give away a reading, and I am deciding that on the fly. But even without the prizes, the prize for doing the Mercury retrograde meditation challenge is feeling centered and feeling like your nervous system is regulated and feeling like you've started or rekindled your meditation habit. All of those things matter. All of those things are going to benefit your life more than a reading will, honestly. So the reading is great. It offers great clarity, but having a consistent meditation practice is something that you can do without me. And that's the idea of the meditation challenges. I'm teaching you how to meditate without needing apps or tools or things, just finding it within yourself. So we'll talk about why that's indicated. And if you want to join, I've opened the 100 Healers Circle up again for beta enrollment. And so if you're catching this live, you're already there. So don't worry about it. It will be in the same platform where you're catching this live. If you want to participate, it's super fun. It will help you with some of the stuff that we're going to try to work with that I'm going to tell you about for Mercury retrograde, the things I'm going to tell you about on this episode. The challenge kind of gamifies it and gives you a thing to check off. And I know we love that. Hack our dopamine systems, right? So then the other announcement is the yearly planning party this year, the highly awaited YOGISCOPES 2025 planner that a lot of folks have been asking me about will be out by Black Friday. You will be able to order it. So by next Friday, whatever that is, the 29th, you will be able to order it. The yearly planning party will be December 15th from 1 to 4 p.m. If you are in the 100 Healers Circle, you will be able to RSVP. I'm going to post it before this podcast is out for the public. And after that 100 Healers Circle enrollment closes this Friday, November 15th, I will extend the invitation to drop into that event for the public. But you might want to jump on the 100 Healers Circle while you can, because it'll be much cheaper. So let's talk about it. That's happening on the day that Mercury goes direct. And we're going to explore all of the things of Mercury retrograde, why I think this is just working out perfectly this way. So Mercury, as I mentioned in the intro, is going retrograde on Monday, November 25th. So around 8 p.m. Eastern time, Mercury will station retrograde that day, meaning it stops, from our perspective on Earth, it appears like it stops moving forward in the sky. It does continue moving forward. It's just all from our perspective. And it looks like it stops moving forward. It will stay still for Mercury, only stations for a couple hours. Usually the slower moving planets Saturn, for example, Saturn will be stationed for up to a whole day. Saturn will just look like it's just still in the sky. It's not moving forward or backwards. So Mercury will station for 3 hours or so. And then from our perspective, looks like it starts moving backwards. And so I'm going to explain the astronomy of it because I feel like it helps understand the astrology, how we're making meaning of it in our lives. It is informed by astronomy, what the planets are physically doing. So Mercury doesn't actually move backwards. It's not in the sky. It's stopping and backpedaling in its path around the sun. It's just all of the planets are moving. You can think of it of running around a track, right? There's some in inside lanes and some in outside lanes around the track around the sun, right? And it's not quite like a track where all the lanes are designed to be even. They're a little bit wonky to each other, right? And so when what we're talking about with anything astrologically is not what the planet is physically doing in space. Like when I say Mercury's in Scorpio, it's not like physically between the stars of Scorpio. It's just the stars, the constellations are moving across our night sky on their own little trajectory, and then so are the planets. And the stars, the constellations, are like a backdrop from our perspective on Earth for the planets. And so when we say that Mercury's in Scorpio, it's like saying Scorpio is a backdrop for Mercury, and Mercury's going to keep moving. So are the constellations, in fact. And so they're on different little lines, different little trajectories. But basically it's from our perspective on Earth. So it's kind of like, imagine Earth, we're running our little race around the sun, on our little track around the sun. And then Mercury's running its little track around the sun. But from our perspective, we're like running by and we pass Mercury, right? And so it looks like for a second, you ever do that in a car? And then for a second, that car is right next to you. So that's what we would consider that station direct. And then it looks like it's moving backwards behind us because we're kind of like passing it. And then eventually it'll look like it's starting to move forward again. And that's basically what's happening with a retrograde. And so what that means for you is, you know, that the planet's not actually moving backwards, but it is a time to sort of retrace your steps, right? When a planet goes retrograde, you want to think of anything related to that planet, and I'm going to dive more into Mercury and Scorpio and the Nakshatras in just a moment, but first we're breaking this down into little concepts to understand what it all means, and we'll put it together at the end. So to understand a retrograde, that's kind of what's physically happening and what it appears to be from our perspective. Mercury's still moving its same little speed that it always moves, right? It's just from our perspective. It's a relational game, right? And so that's what astrology is. It's examining our perspective, really. And so when a retrograde happens, anything with an RE, that's like the best thing to do when a retrograde happens. Reorganize, re-examine, think, redo, re-evaluate, reinforce. So you would like reevaluate, like, so when we think about that, it's like, what are you going to reevaluate? What are you going to reinforce? Then we want to look at the planet and the sign to understand that. And so what does Mercury represent? Mercury represents communication. It represents travel. It represents wit. So I think a good way to strengthen Mercury is by telling puns, because puns are like, it takes wit, right? It takes like that quick on your feet is very Mercury. And so then Mercury is also, so when I say travel, this is an important thing I want you to understand about Mercury, is it's like the systems, it represents or rules over the systems of travel. So also in the body, Mercury is connected to the nervous system. Okay, so when I say travel, I don't mean, like usually when we have Mercury retrograde, we see delays with travel, traffic jams. And so it's usually, in most cases, the folks get to their destination. You will have delays, but you will get there. And so it's the same thing with the nervous system. You might experience dysregulation when Mercury is retrograde, especially in Scorpio, and we'll talk about why momentarily when we get to that explaining Scorpio part. But it's not the and so the same thing with like, it's like the system of communication rather than like the message itself, if that makes sense. So it's easy. I feel like it's easier to explain that. So it's like you'll probably have typos in your email or whatever, but they'll still know what you meant and the email will still get there, but there will be typos. And that's what we find is in the body is people get, and so notice this in yourself. This is a good Mercury retrograde practice. So notice when it happens to other people so that you can be less reactive, but notice when it happens in yourself, people get really dysregulated around typos. And it's like, did you know what I meant? Like, what's the big deal? Okay, so people get really dysregulated around typos. People get really dysregulated around traffic jams, around delays, around holdups. And so this is a good Mercury retrograde practice. Can you just like, you're going to be delayed and you can be like mad about it, or you can practice some nervous system regulation techniques and you'll still get there eventually, right? So that's really the vibe of Mercury retrograde in a nutshell. Any Mercury retrograde, those are like the major things we see, and the major things that you can work with in your own practice is, so that nervous system regulation, that's why we meditate for Mercury retrograde. One of the reasons, one of the things we're working with in the Mercury retrograde challenge as part of the 100 Healers Circle, is that nervous system regulation. We work with it in our meditation practice so that when you get in a traffic jam, you know what to do. So you can notice if you're getting dysregulated, and you can notice if you're getting dysregulated over an email or over technology, because you can expect there to be glitches with those things, with, communication, travel, those kind of things, because that's what Mercury rules over. And so that's just any Mercury retrograde in general. So you would want to plan extra time when you travel. It's not a good time to buy tickets for far off travel. If you're like planning a trip in advance, maybe don't buy the tickets during Mercury retrograde. Just be extra careful. Just double check things. Proofread. It's not a time to, if you're planning travel in the future and you want to look and see if Mercury retrogrades then, because if it is, it's not the time to give yourself a short layover, because you just need to know that that'll be the time that like your bags get lost. They eventually get there, but they get lost. Your flight's delayed. And so if you had a longer layover, you would have made it, but you gave yourself a 30-minute layover because you thought you could make it. But you know what I mean? And sometimes a 30-minute layover, like I've had 15-minute layovers before and made it just fine, but Mercury wasn't retrograde. So these are the kind of things that a benefit of studying astrology, or you get the 2025 YOGISCOPES planner. Keep an eye on your email for when that's released, because it'll go to email first. And so then you can know, you can look at it, you can reference that, and you can give yourself extra time. I'm not saying don't travel. I'm saying give yourself extra time and be nice to that poor ticket agent, the gate agent, whatever, at the airport. You know what I mean? Or like, don't get road rage in traffic, especially at this one, because Mars will also be retrograde during this time. So I'll say more about that in a moment. Let's talk about Scorpio. So hopefully that helps understand Mercury retrograde in general. And so Scorpio is ruled by Mars, which is part of the reason I say Mars is definitely related at this time. Scorpio is ruled by Mars. It is a water sign, often misconstrued or like just common misconception. People think Scorpio is a fire sign. And I would say that's probably because of the qualities it has that it gets from its ruler Mars. Mars is a very fiery planet, which does give Scorpio a little bit of a fiery energy, but it's a water sign. So water signs are very connected to the emotions, related to the emotions, right? And so Scorpio is your like deep emotions, like your maybe things you don't like share with anybody, right? The parts of you that you don't share, your like turmoil, things that you turmoil over, right? And it's connected to things like research and hidden information. So that could be your hidden emotions, things that you don't really share with anybody. That could also be secrets, really. And so Scorpio also is connected to sexuality. So because it's ruled by Mars, because it's this more like hidden energy, anything that I bring up astrologically is usually seen in more than one place in the chart. So fifth house is romance. Eighth house, Scorpio, eighth house, eighth sign, Scorpio is sexuality, just in like the term sexual, like what is your sexuality? Like the more hidden, I guess I would say, parts of your sexuality. And then 12th house is, it's funny to, this is like a funny translation thing to me. It's called bed pleasures. And that's like, it just seems like a very Indian way to say things. 12th house is bed pleasures. I hope that makes sense, where see how all those things are related, your romance, your sexuality, and your bed pleasures, but they're all kind of seen in different ways of the charts. So I hope that makes sense, how Scorpio is kind of like one aspect of sexuality and there's other aspects seen elsewhere. I was telling you, I get extra tangenty and I stumble over my words more when Mercury is retrograde. We're in the shadow period right now, so as I'm recording this, Mercury is not actually retrograde yet. I'll tell you the shadow period dates momentarily. They will also be in the companion post if, you know, like I like to listen to things, but personally I'm more of a visual kinesthetic learner than an auditory learner. So that's why I try to make things in different formats. The audio, if you're an auditory learner, podcast is great. If you are a visual learner, then check out those companion posts. Go to yogiscopes.com and navigate to the weekly Yogiscopes. You can find it in the nav bar in different places depending on what kind of device you're on. But and then if you're a more kinesthetic learner, that's what our Moon Day meditation, movement and meditation practices are for in the 100 Healers Circle. You can come and do practices with us for what we're talking about on the podcast. And so lots of different ways to come at it. Anyway, I will have all those relevant dates, things to be on the lookout for, will be in that companion post, because sometimes it's like we can hear it, but it'll just in one ear out the other. And when it comes to those dates, you'll want to have a reference without having to scroll through the podcast or listen to the whole thing again to find it. So that's why I make those companion posts. So anyway, Scorpio, hopefully I did a good job explaining what it represents overall. So we have Mercury retrograding through two different nakshatras in Scorpio, Jyestha and Anuradha. And I will also have in that companion post the dates when it's moving between those nakshatras. So in a nutshell, Jyestha nakshatra translates to eldest or senior-most. And so I would just say what you need to know for Mercury's retrograde through this section of Scorpio is basically it's a good time to reconsider, what do you want to be known for? What do you want to be an elder of, if that makes sense? Like what do you want recognition for? And so the way to get there, and so what we're doing at Mercury retrograde, the way to get there using the energies of this nakshatra is to care about the community and be that resource for the community, right? Sort of like be the change you wish to see in the world kind of thing. Whatever you want recognition for, like don't talk the talk, walk the walk. That's kind of the vibe of this nakshatra. And so with Mercury retrograde there, you might consider or reconsider, I would say, reevaluate and reinforce if there are things that are working, reinforce those behaviors. If there are things that are not working, consider what you're going to do instead during this Mercury retrograde, sort of how you're showing up. And so the journal prompt should help with that. And then Anuradha is translated as subsequent success. And so it's a similar vibe. That's why I'm not going too deep into explaining the nuances between these nakshatras, because they're both entirely within Scorpio and they might be subtly different, but similar. So same thing with Anuradha. The translation for this one is subsequent success. So I would say both Nakshatras have this connection to like delayed gratification and to putting in work now for later, right? And putting in more menial work, I guess. Like menial is maybe not the right word, but what is it? Mother Teresa or somebody like that said something like the way to do great things is by doing small things greatly, or something. I'm butchering that quote, but the idea is like, we're not trying to sweep in and do like grand acts. We're considering what little small acts we do on a regular basis are contributing to our subsequent success, or what we want to be like the eldest or the senior most, the expert in, right? And so these things very much have connection to, so Jyestha's aim of life is Artha, or the pursuit of wealth. Anuradha's aim is Dharma. So both things are sort of like, I would say they're related to like your career or your duty, right? Like getting out there in the world and doing stuff rather than being more spiritual and removed from the world. Scorpio, as I mentioned, is things that are very like under the surface. And so the way that we show up, so I was saying like, these two nakshatras are bringing a more like external, like what are you actually doing in the world more than spiritual. But it's that work under the surface, like with Scorpio related matters, your hidden emotions affect and are, so I would say this thing is all like one big cycle. Like, so your emotions, it's like the CBT triangle, right? Like your thoughts impact your feelings, and vice versa, and your behavior. So your feelings impact your thoughts, which impacts your behavior. Your behavior can impact your feelings, which can then impact your thoughts. And it's like a cycle. And so you can kind of jump in. We talked about this last week, in fact, in YOGISCOPES Live. I think we talked about it after in the Q&A portion, after I turn the podcast recording off. But you can kind of jump in the cycle anywhere. And so for this Mercury retrograde, we're jumping in the cycle at your feelings, because that's Scorpio. So you can often I see folks trying to like positive affirmation themselves into different behavior, and I am a big proponent of do the behavior before you feel like doing the behavior, and that will then lead to more feeling like doing the behavior, whatever the behavior is. So this was in relation to Saturn going direct, I believe. Last week we were talking about it, but it applies here too, because Mercury retrograde is, this one in particular is kind of all about reevaluating your feelings and how they impact maybe your feelings about yourself and your place in the world and your role in the world, right? What you want to be known for, like Jyestha, and how you're collaborating with other people. All of that is going to impact and be impacted by how you feel about yourself and what you believe about yourself. But I would say with Scorpio, it's more related to those feelings. So also Anuradha is symbolized by a lotus flower. So is one of the symbols of Anuradha Nakshatra. So that whole idea of like blooming through adversity, doing the behavior even if you don't feel like it, it's very much coming up right now. And so with that idea of subsequent success with Mercury retrograde, it's a really good time to reassess what you want your subsequent success to be and how you are behaving right now. And so this is a really powerful time for that kind of like nervous system work, because often what I see in the yoga therapy work I do with people, they'll have like some big dream or goal, and it could be like an achievement, or it could just be like a different, like they want to feel different in their life and in their days. And the block there for most folks, between going from like where you are and where you want to be, whether that's a process goal or an outcome goal, like an achievement or just feeling different in your days, is usually it's like feelings and nervous system, which is all what this Mercury retrograde is about, is like what feelings are you having that are probably dysregulating your nervous system. And if you can use the practices like of meditation to then regulate your nervous system to move through those feelings, then you can like reach that subsequent success. And so that's the kind of stuff we'll be working with in the Mercury Retrograde Meditation Challenge this time. So that's the overall energies. Hopefully that makes sense. And so let's talk about what it's a good time for and a bad time for. It's a good time for goal realignment. And like I was just kind of talking about, how are your behaviors aligning with your long-term goals, your subsequent success, things you want to be known for. It's also a good time because always Mercury retrograde is a good time for decluttering your mind, decluttering your schedule, decluttering your tech, right? So that's another factor in the Mercury retrograde meditation challenge that we do. You'll get like bonus points for things like decluttering a drawer, decluttering your inbox. And so you might just notice, even if you don't participate in the challenge, you might just notice that through this whole time, really from like when the shadow period begins to when it ends, probably peaking in the middle when Mercury's combust. And again, all those dates will be in the companion post on yogiscopes.com. You find weekly Yogiscopes, you'll find it. All those dates, it is when these things will peak. And so you might just notice that you're like feeling like doing that anyway, unsubscribing from things, clearing out your email inbox, reorganizing your junk drawer. I don't know. Just ride that wave while it's there, and take it little bitty steps at a time. Don't try to like declutter your whole house at once. Like you might just do a drawer or an area, or you might just unsubscribe from like 10 things, and then your email inbox might still be chaos, but it's less chaos. And so that's the idea of Mercury retrograde in general. It's also a good time for, as I mentioned, just giving yourself extra time for delays in travel. Just know that they're going to be there and give yourself extra time. Leave a little earlier and use those meditation practices of regulating your nervous system, which is what we'll practice in the meditation challenge, to be okay when there are tech glitches and travel delays. And so this Mercury retrograde in particular is a good time for emotional self-study, just exploring how your emotions, that CBT triangle, right? Like your thoughts, behaviors, and emotions, and where one is driving the other. And I do think it's like a cyclical thing, right? Like you don't have to change your thoughts before you can change your feelings and behavior. You can change your behavior and that might change the others, right? So do it even when you don't feel like it. It's a bad time for confrontation, aggressive conflict. Just be a little extra sweet with your words. So especially during the middle of this retrograde, Mars will go retrograde. So Mars, the ruler of Scorpio, is debilitated the whole time in Cancer. And we'll talk about that on its own. Mars retrograde we'll talk about on its own separate episode and set of resources, because it deserves that. There's a lot of nuance there that I can't do justice to right now, but basically that during that period, so I think it's December 5th or 6th when Mars goes retrograde. And so Mercury will be retrograde until December 15th. So this like right smack in the middle of this retrograde when Mars, the ruler of Scorpio, will go retrograde. So what that means, Mars is this fiery aggressiveness. Cancer is the emotions. So that's where Mars retrograde is sort of bringing this fiery aggressiveness to emotions. And Mercury is all about communication. So just if you do have to have harder conflicts, I'm not saying avoid hard conversations. In fact, I never want to give that idea that I'm saying like save your hard conversations for another time, because there's hardly times where everything's supportive, and we have to learn to navigate the less than supportive energies rather than avoid them is something I'm always hoping to communicate. And so just know that that's a vibe. And if you do have to have some kind of confrontation, just lean extra hard into that nervous system regulation so that you don't get flooded, so you don't get extra activated, so that you can navigate it with more grace. rather than emotional intensity. Know that the energies are more supportive of emotional intensity, and just recognize that in yourself, so that that's all we can ever control, right, is ourselves. And it's also a bad time for letting melancholy or frustration take over. So that's really, Scorpio can be kind of broody, you know, it can be kind of like, overthinking. It can be kind of, just spinning in those emotions. So just try not to let yourself get caught up in that. Try to find the flow. And so your yoga practices would be daily meditation. Always, Mercury retrograde is the time to start or rekindle a daily meditation or mindfulness practice. If you don't have one, Mercury retrograde meditation challenge is meant to help with that. And so breath awareness throughout your day. That's what you're getting from that daily meditation practice, is a strong practice of breath awareness, so that you can carry it throughout your day, because it's not really doing you much good if you meditate for 20 minutes every morning and then you don't think about your breath again all day, right? So take that breath awareness with you throughout your day. In your yoga practice, I would say second chakra work, flowing movements, connect to that water element. And then here are your journal prompts for this Mercury retrograde. So 1, what legacy do I want to leave behind? Like, what do you want to be known for? Number 2, how can I better integrate my light and shadow selves? So Scorpio vibes, shadow work. So it's a good time to think about that. Like, how can you integrate that shadow side of yourself, the more hidden parts of yourself, into the parts that you do show people, your light side, I guess. 3, what beliefs or habits no longer serve my growth, and how can I release them with grace? Is it a changing behavior? Think about that CBT triangle, right? Like, it might not be, I don't want you to just try to gaslight yourself into thinking or feeling a way that you don't think or feel, but can you behave in a way that a person who thinks or feels that way might behave until you do think or feel that way, is a good thing to consider at this Mercury retrograde. Number 4, how do my emotions influence my decision making, and where can I cultivate balance? So back to that CBT triangle again. And number 5, where in my life do I feel stuck, and what small steps can I take and reinforce during this retrograde period towards that transformation? So there you have it. The sign by sign interpretations will be on that weekly YOGISCOPES page for folks in the 100 Healers Circle. If you want to join the 100 Healers Circle, the enrollment closes on Friday at midnight Eastern time, 11:59 p.m. Eastern time. And you can sign up for it on that companion post before then. Otherwise, keep your eyes out for the invite to the yearly planning party and to get your planner next week. So until then, keep your feet on the ground, your head in the stars, and stay in the light. Until next time, we'll stick around for Q&A here for folks joining live.